Continuing on this theme of systems and the interoperability and the usability of those systems, we'll now ask Tom Mercer to join us. Tom is Senior Vice President of Digital Products at Bibliotheca. Tom, you want to draw up your slides? And then we'll have questions for you both at the end of the session.
Right, are you seeing my screen there with Bibliotheca logo?
Tom, we can see your slides and can hear you fine.
Great, well thanks. I'm going to talk a little bit about, let's see here, get my slides to advance, there we go. Well thanks for having us today. Just wanted to talk a little bit about Bibliotheca. We're not always well known by everybody in the library space. That's because we used to be 3M Library Systems, which people were far more recognizable. And you know, our mission is transforming libraries. We do that through technology products, primarily at public libraries, through security. We develop self-check machines to allow people to borrow materials using RFID. We have products even now that are coming out of the Nordics, which are really popular, to help extend hours without even having any staff members in the library, allowing authorized users to come in to access the public library and to move on. And then we also have the Cloud Library, which is our ebook lending service. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about interoperability in that standpoint, from how ebooks interact with ILS systems and how we've worked with people like New York Public and Simply E down the road. So when we launched Cloud Library in 2012, one of the first things all of our customers said is that they wanted ebooks to be discoverable within their ILS catalog. This hadn't been something other players have been willing to do. And so we started on a path which created APIs and allowed API integration with ILS. We were the first to do that with the Polaris ILS system, now part of Ex Libris after a couple different acquisitions. But that, you know, in a sense, started a little bit of an arms race where we created APIs. We've course did it quickly. They were proprietary, and others followed suit because it became important. From a user perspective, libraries just wanted to see, can my users discover all of the content from my different vendors in this application? And that was the first step. The second step was partnering with mobile library apps like Boopsy. Boopsy doesn't really exist anymore, but we still partner with people like Solus and Communico and Capira that are really leaders in the library space. So we opened up those APIs to integrate with mobile apps, and again, that started further competition in the space. We get and this all comes from, you know, really customer demands. The customers wanted to see it, we wanted to react quickly, and we partnered with different vendors to allow these things. We also were the first to allow ebook reading within Simply E. So this was an initiative by New York Public where they didn't just want content to be discoverable in their apps. They wanted people to actually be able to borrow the book and read it fully independent of the content vendors, right? Cloud Library, Overdrive, Access 360, we all have our own app experiences. Simply E pulls those together into a single experience so users can find content from any single content vendor and do that. And that's based on a couple of different proprietary standards on the back end, primarily being Adobe. So Adobe Drm was sort of the de facto DRM back in 2010 at the beginning when people were just launching ebooks. Things have changed a lot. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But everyone's using Adobe Drm to deliver the files to make sure we're protecting the intellectual property of the publishers that we're distributing on. We were then the first just recently to launch audiobooks with Simply E, so it allows users not just to discover ebooks, but audiobooks. And then I'll talk a little bit about just interoperability with vendors, but again, we worked with Collection HQ to create custom integration where we're sharing data. And again, I mentioned that because this is one of those slightly awkward things we all run into in the library world where Collection HQ is owned by Baker and Taylor, now Follett. They're a competitor to us. Partnering and sharing data on behalf of our libraries. And so again, there's always these interesting dynamics in the library world where we compete on one product and we share on the other product. And as we're moving our technology stack moving forward, we're starting to use more open source technology. We're building a new reading experience based on the Drm reader. We're providing that back to the open source code base so others can take advantage of the new V2 Drm reader, which is really open source technology on top of the EPUB files. So kind of the speed bumps to interoperability, at least in this space. And again, just kind of looking back at the history I went through, a lot of the speed bumps became, we were a business quickly reacting to customer needs, and other competitors in the space weren't really open to integration at all with ILS and had been resistant. So some of the challenges in the space that existed were, some players have exclusive content. Not all content can be sold on every platform. This becomes a need for integration, but also a barrier down the road. One of the other barriers to the market demanding more interoperability is Overdrive does command a very large share of the public library ebook market. So some libraries have decided they don't need interoperability. They simply will pick one vendor. Well, that obviously creates challenges down the road in terms of back to the exclusive content thing we're talking about, back to a number of other things. Having just one vendor doesn't really deliver the value that you want. You want libraries to be able to source content from anywhere and give people a singular user experience. One of the other challenges building out these reading experiences were some of the DRM controls for content, right? Part of our relationship with publishers is that we need to assure them that their content's going to be protected, it's going to be encrypted, it can't just be certainly opened up, it's going to expire after the lending period. So as I mentioned, Adobe had been sort of the de facto standard for publishing, but that's changing as Adobe's slowly exiting that part of the market. And then the last piece is just all those contractual reporting requirements back to the publishing community, right? It's important that we have a lot of control over our content to make sure we can report on these things. So again, breaking down those barriers is going to take time. I think Simply E's done a great job of building that first level interface where reading can happen, and I think we'll see more of that down the road. So really from a library standpoint, when they're asking what am I looking at in interoperability, they just want their library patrons to find all of their content in all of the different areas, whether it's a discovery layer like BiblioCommons, whether it's their OPAC from their ILS, whether it's a library app like Communico, or whether it's in the Cloud Library app or a proprietary app. They want patrons to have a singular experience, but again, reading DRM protocols means that they kind of have to have a variety of approaches to that. One of the interesting counter effects of this is that when you look at the app space, people do tend to prefer smaller apps with smaller footprints. They don't necessarily want an app that does everything. They might just want an ebook app for an ebook, an audiobook app for that. And if you look at how Apple delivers content on their devices, they don't just have one app for content. They have one for movies, one for books, one for audiobooks, one for podcasts. And again, there's definitely a little bit of a challenge in the space where you want one experience for users that want everything in a single place, but you also want those experiences broken out and easily accessible on mobile phones so that people can have choice and preference. And so balancing those two things is really important to the public library community. And we want to make sure our content's discoverable, but we also want to have simple, clean, intuitive experiences that people may prefer. So where can we go? One of the things is moving to open source DRM. There's a DRM protocol based out of the European data labs called Lcp Drm, and this is really going to, as we're invested in this, we're committed to migrating some of our technology to more open source, which then allows other players to take that, integrate it into their app, and really can help open up the library experience. One of the most prohibitive parts of reading experiences, even for the Simply E team, was every app logo cost upwards of $5,000 in license fees just back to Adobe. Well, that stopped library, from having their own app. Ideally, in a future world, they'd like things. They don't want the Simply E app. New York Public wants the New York Public Library app, and Chicago wants the Chicago app, and they want people to read, open up those books, and consume them. That's going to happen more as more open source technology opens up and some of these prohibitive sourcing requirements come. The second is just libraries diversifying their content acquisition. If they really do only invest in one supplier, then interoperability takes a backseat, and I think that's hurting some of the progress that can be made, because the users that stick with that proprietary app rather than migrating them to a more cohesive experience branded from the local library. And the last is just continuing to partner with libraries and other vendors to keep improving the user experiences. We're committed to making sure content is accessible across anywhere in the ecosystem. And we're going to keep driving that forward by using open source technology, by donating that back to the open source community, by creating APIs, and ultimately as standards get built out further, we'll continue to use those standards to make sure digital content becomes more and more integrated and less siloed. And that was kind of it. I don't even know how long I went. I might be less than 10 minutes. But feel free to reach out with any questions, ideas on integration, or goals. My contact information is here on the slide. And I just want to thank everybody for the time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate it.